Welcome to the next edition of When Freedom Speaks, an HIV update for women and girls. Thank you to the Star of Zion and the Amy Zion Communication Department for this collaboration with the Women's Home and Overseas Department's Health Initiative. I will now introduce the host for this evening, Mrs. Aretha Abrams, who will introduce our guest presenter, Mrs. Deborah Dennison. Aretha Abrams is the Episcopal Health Coordinator for the Mid-Atlantic Episcopal District and also serves as the Columbus Cincinnati District Coordinator of the Young Adult Missionary Society and District Sacred Health Coordinator. Aretha is a native of Cleveland, Ohio, but resides in Cincinnati, Ohio, and is a University of Cincinnati alumni. Aretha is currently the Assistant Director of the Contracts Division in the Office of Research Department of Sponsored Research Services at the University of Cincinnati. Aretha is a writer and a poet. Aretha is currently a member of St. Mark Amy Zion Church in Cincinnati, Ohio, where she is a member of the Voices of St. Mark Choir, quarterly conference secretary, a class leader, and serves in the church in other capacities as needed. Aretha is married to Joseph Abrams II. They have 4 children: Candace Abrams, Joseph Abrams, Elisa Abrams, and Justice Abrams. Hey, Aretha, thank you so much for agreeing to be the host for this evening.
Thank you for that introduction. And how are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Good. You're a busy lady. You've been in
I
my inbox.
am, but glad to be here and that you can participate. I know you will do great.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, thank you, and good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here this evening for tonight's presentation. And I would also like to thank our sponsors, the Star of Zion, Amy Zion Communications Department, and the WHOM Society for allowing us this opportunity to use this platform to raise awareness about HIV and AIDS. And I want to thank you for your attendance and also thank God for being with us tonight as well. And it's not too late to text or call or share this broadcast and tell somebody to join us because we have some information tonight that you are not going to want to miss. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce our esteemed guest presenter this evening, Mrs. Deborah Dennison. By profession, Deborah is a research specialist, trainer, and training capacity building coordinator for the HIV Prevention and Care Project at the University of Pittsburgh Graduate School of Public Health Department of Infectious Disease and Microbiology. Her primary functions include supervision and training of the HPCP capacity building team, serving as liaison and lead resource to the State Department of Health's Bureau of Communicable Diseases in its promotion to identify HIV and AIDS preventions and care activities offered to its state-funded HIV service organization, as well as developer of supportive skills building trainings and technical assistance for state-funded HIV service agencies. Deborah has served as a master trainer and content expert for ETRs, meaning education, training, research, for CDC-funded Evolve Project, a national HIV e-learning training center, as well as a master trainer and mentor for one of its CDC-funded behavioral interventions focused on women living with HIV. She is a past member of the HIV and AIDS Working Group within the Center for Minority Health, now known as the Center for Health Equity, at the Graduate School of Public Health, University of Pittsburgh, and the National Minority AIDS Council's, that's NMAC, National Capacity Building Advisory Board, Division of Technical Assistance and Training. Ms. Dennison has also served as a consultant for the Balm and Gilead's Health Ministry CDC-funded component. Deborah is an African American HIV University AAHU Fellow of the Black AIDS Institute, BAI, a policy and training center focused on ending the HIV/AIDS epidemic in Black communities by engaging and mobilizing Black institutions and individuals. With respect to church activity, Mrs. Dennison is a member of the Homewood AME Zion Church Allegheny Conference in Mid-Atlantic. She is the initial and past Episcopal Health Coordinator for what was then Mid-Atlantic 1. Under her leadership, the Episcopal's health ministries, Sacred, led to the development of health ministries throughout the Episcopal area with a focus on HIV and AIDS and other health disparities affecting African Americans. Annual Episcopal Health Leadership Institute's development of the ministry mission statement, goals, objectives, and health activities and observances of National Health Awareness Days were realized. Deborah Dennison possesses years of public health experience focused on program development and training. She holds a BS degree in school health, K through 12, from the State University of New York at Cortland, and an MS public health degree in community health education from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. Her go-to scripture is Philippians 4:6-7. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. Please join me in welcoming our guest presenter for this evening, Miss Deborah Dennison. Give her some thumbs up and some hearts. Show her some love.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. It is indeed my pleasure to be here and know that I greet you all in Jesus' joy. Thank you so much for Rita for that introduction. It's nice working with you again, and also Joy. I'm hoping that what the three of us have come together to do will help share some new awareness on the issue of HIV and AIDS. So why don't we just go ahead and get started? Whenever I do presentations that deal with women and AIDS, I always now turn to this young woman. I was once at an international AIDS conference, and she got up and she said, she gave a testimony in the middle of this. It was like over 1,000 people in this auditorium, and they were speaking of the science, and she said, I just have to speak. And she told her story, and she ended with, so I went from hiding under a rock to smoking a rock to leaning on my rock. And I was like, I really have to speak to her. So I finally got to meet her. Unfortunately, traveling back home, I lost her name, but she said that, yes, I could share her story. So the story is that she had something traumatic happen in her life. She was a high-powered person in a bank. And with all that was going on, she ended up, her job started slipping. Things were happening at home. She was embarrassed to let people know. So she started hiding from the very people that were once important to her. And things got so bad, she ended up homeless. She lost her job. She had to leave home. And she said somehow or other, she ended up on crack, right? And then she said one day she was so tired, and it just happened to be a Sunday. She heard the music and she went into the church. And she said she decided that she'd just sit in the back and leave because she knew that they wouldn't want to be bothered with her. But she talked about how the people just embraced her. And she said she knew she looked bad. She knew she smelled bad, but they were acting as if she was dressed in her finest. So to make a long story short, she started going to the church and eventually accepted Christ. With the pastor's help in the women's group, she joined a program and got off drugs. So why do I start with her? I start with her because Jesus is all of our rocks, and he's the rock for all of us. And we need to understand no matter what there is, he's there with the help. And particularly in HIV and AIDS, we need to understand that we are the safe house, the safe space, particularly for women who are struggling through this in silence because of the stigma. So with that, let us begin. So by the numbers, in the United States, we need to recognize that women account for 1 in 5 of the individuals living with HIV based upon the statistics that were gathered, the data in from 2018 back. And what's the interesting part of that is even though we're 1 in 5, notice we're not seeing much. Notice there's very little said about women. Any women you see in this presentation are actually women living with HIV making a difference. And so these women are actually working on different projects. They help incorporate laws. They worked on the National AIDS Strategy, doing things because what they were finding was that our voices were not at the table. Our voices were not being heard. And if you're not at the table, and if your voice is not being heard, those with the power, those who have the inroad, all funding, all of the important things tend to go their way. So it's not by accident that we don't see much about women. It really has a lot to do with the structure, with power in terms of who has that. So when we continue on and think about women, and the new statistics have shown that African-American women, as of 2019, represented 40.3% of all new cases of diagnosed cases of HIV. Yet, they're just 13.4% of the population. What's with that? There's something behind that. And we're going to just touch on it a little bit. If you notice, followed behind them would be our Latinx sisters, who are 18.5% of the population, but not far behind if you realize who they are. So it's African-American women, then whites, and then our Latinx who make up the majority. So when we look at these new diagnosed cases, you say, well, what's happening with the Black woman? Particularly when we know that HIV in every category is going down. If it's going down, and even in the Black community, and even in our Black women, why is it going down less? And so we're going to explore that a little bit. And one of the reasons has to do with structural racism. It has to do with the powers that be in terms of social determinants of health, where we live, where we play, the exposures that we have to access, to gaining new knowledge. It all plays a role. So let's look at this. When you look at the nation as a whole, who has the majority of cases? The majority of cases you will find always right now in men who have sex with men, and particularly African-American men, followed by Latin men, then whites. Now look at African-American women. They are much less, but they tower over the other women. And so when we want to talk about that, it's an understanding that it's kind of like place matters. Okay, so place matters, and we're going to get to that. When we say place matters, we want to talk about where you live, where you play, where you work. Has a lot to do with what types of things you'll engage in. So if we were to look at this country, and you look at how is HIV divided up, notice that the Northeast and the South and the West, there are biggies, but in particular the South. Where do Blacks primarily live? They're in the South and the Northeast. Now in the West, you also have quite a lot. But when you're looking at the Black population, you look at urban areas. And if you're looking at the Black population, look at the blue. Every place where there's spikes, where it's high, it's in urban areas. What is going on with that? What should we be doing about that if place matters? And we say place matters because particularly in urban areas, people tend to date. They tend to live and die within those communities. They tend not to go out into other areas as much. So what happens is that where the pool of HIV virus is, it tends to be largely in those populations. If you're not being treated, then the virus, right, is there in a larger percentage. If the virus is in the community in a larger percentage, what does that mean? It means that you are at increased risk living in an urban area, living in the South. and for us living in the North, that places women at greater risk. So before we really get into the details of what are those risks, I wanted to take a minute and speak about older women. When we think of HIV, we don't think about older women a lot, but we need to, be particularly African American women, because we're finding out that of all other older persons, our African American women have spiked in terms of their infection. And so one of the reasons is because women, once they reach menopause, don't think in terms of prevention. When we talked about condoms, if you're a young woman, you thought about it for pregnancy, but you didn't think about it in terms of protection. There's not much advertisement. There's not much talk. If you have a good gynecologist, one of the things the gynecologist does, he takes a sexual history. He talks to you about that with each of your annual visits. But when you get a certain age, a lot of doctors don't. When they ask doctors, they say, well, they're not really sexually active. You really don't have to worry about them. And what we're finding out is that that's not the case. So the woman on the left in the red shirt, Jane Fowler, she had a lot to do with bringing AIDS awareness to women. She's this rich woman. You may notice her face. At one time she was on television, and her husband had died, and she met up with a friend who happened to have been in her wedding, and his wife had died. So over time they gathered, they started dating. To make a long story short, they dated, and then he disappeared. And she said she was trying to up her insurance, and she was told she couldn't get the insurance because of HIV. When she then started trying to reach back out to the man, she couldn't get him. And finally, one of her children told her that he had died of that. And so she had acquired the virus, never thinking she was at risk, because what was the media saying? You weren't hearing older women, and you definitely weren't hearing anything about white women. And the woman on the other side in the gray, she was actually working within a facility, a drug rehab place. And a lot of those clients are also HIV, living with HIV. So she knew better. She even used to train on AIDS awareness and prevention. But she and this guy started seeing each other, and over time she felt it was safe. So you know how the story's going to go. She stopped using her protection. She too was positive. Why do I tell these stories? Because we need to get these messages to our older women as well. The two in the middle represent people dating again. Right. And one of the things research has found, and it was a wonderful research done in California a while back, where they found that because there is a surplus of women, when you look at who's dying, that it's been found that lots of times women don't mind sharing. I have Harry on Saturdays and Thursdays, and Betty has Harry on Sundays and Monday. And Harry's having a ball, but they're finding also that Harry is one of the factors of the virus spreading. And so we need to start giving the messages to our older women as well. Some of those realities are they're divorced, they're widowed, they are sexually active, even though doctors say they are uncomfortable speaking about them. They're not practicing safer sex because no one's telling them to. They only think about that is for pregnancy. Okay. And so that is important for us to understand that it is a denial. And one of the problems with as we get older, your immune system begins to be less efficient. And so some of those things of being tired, not just feeling well, sometimes in a younger person, the doctor may ask a different set of questions. When an older person comes, it tends to be more looked at as, well, you're getting older, and they're not as quick to offer the test when in fact they should. When you want to look at women's risk in general, there are 4 key things. One, in terms of women, is stigma. The stigma in terms of someone finding out. The stigma of not even wanting to go for care, so because what people are going to think of me. Even the stigma in terms of media and what they tend to decide what to share and what not to share. Another thing is being involved in sexual relationships or injecting drug relationships with people that you don't know their histories. right? Not being aware of preventive measures to take care of yourself. Notice the woman in the cage. This is one of the biggest factors of HIV in women, intimate partner violence. It is so silent, but it is one of the things that we really have to get a handle on within the church in terms of educating, having workshops, people coming in, having a space for people to just speak. Some people live alone, particularly seniors. Who do they get to share with? But so of these four, one that I really want us to leave here with is understanding that intimate partner violence is a key risk for women, and all that includes older women. So when we talk about transmission, we already know this. It's not transmitted by casual contact, such as shaking hands, hugging, kissing, sitting on toilet seats, and that sort of thing. It's not even transmitted by shaking hands or giving blood. But what it is transmitted by certain fluids. So when we want to talk about transmission, we shouldn't be looking at who the person is. We should be looking at what's being transferred, what's being shared. And the shared is blood, semen, or pre-cum, that pre-seminal fluid, right? Vaginal secretions, rectal fluid, breast milk. That's something we have to look at. And there's a whole new campaign around breast milk when we look at how medicine is improved. Should a lactating mother breastfeed or should she not? What is that issue all around that? One of the things we also want to look at is rectal fluid, which means rectal sexual activity. When we think of rectal sexual activity, we tend to think of men who have sex with men. Well, we know that heterosexual couples, some engage in rectal sex as well. And rectal sex is the most risky of all sexual activities. Are women getting this message to find out those things? So when we want to look at, and we're talking about that risk, we need to be talking about sex. When we talk about sex, we're talking about male to male, male to female, female to female, even though it's less, whatever the sex, if there's an exchange of those body fluids, you are at risk. The other is mother to child transmission. When a mother is living with the virus, and if she is not receiving care from her doctor on her meds, that virus can be passed on to her baby. And it even can be passed on during a vaginal delivery. So if the virus can remain being detected in her, she may not even have a vaginal delivery. They may actually have a C-section. If that mother's viral load is a certain amount, they now say there's a question of should that mother even be breastfeeding. Those of you who breastfeed or know anything about it, any antibodies, anything that the mother has built up from illnesses she's had and has fighters from her immune system, it actually passes on to the baby through the breast milk, particularly in the beginning couple of weeks. So if a mother is not being treated, just by doing that loving thing of breastfeeding. So are we getting those messages out? The other thing is drug use, in particular injection drug use, and that is on the increase in some of our communities. But the bottom line, when we are talking about activities and transmission, we need to understand it's not about who you are, it's what you do. For far too long, we have stigmatized different groups. Oh, that's that gay disease. Oh, that's those guys that sit on the corner and shoot up disease. When in fact, if any of us are engaging in an activity where you can be exposed to those 5 body fluids that I said, you are at risk. We all are at risk. It's not about risk groups. There are groups of people that have higher incidence because of their behavior, not because of who they are. And we need to start separating behavior, because when we talk about point fingers at who are the people with AIDS, we're pointing it away from us and not realizing that we also are in jeopardy if we are exposed to risk. So there is no one risk group. We are all. When you want to talk about HIV and AIDS, the virus has to enter your body. So if you're engaged in some type of activity and neither of you have the virus, You can do whatever you're doing in terms of transmission. You're not going to get the virus. But if one of the individuals does have the virus, there is opportunity to transmit that virus to someone else. So really quickly, the virus enters your body. And when that virus enters your body in the beginning, your immune system is really trying to fight it off. So when people typically first get HIV, they have a higher incidence of transmitting it, because the immune system is overcooking. Then they go through a period where everything is calm, not feeling anything, until the immune system really starts to break down, and then the person ends up with HIV. With AIDS. So HIV is the initial stage when the virus enters your body. AIDS is just the progression of HIV when your immune system has broken down to the point that you're starting to get all sorts of illnesses. They are not different diseases. They're just different parts on the same continuum from one end to the other. So that's important for us to understand. What are those symptoms around HIV and AIDS? They tend to be things like fever, chills, rash, night sweats, fatigue, right? Those lots of times you can say, oh, I must have the flu. With COVID around, I think I've been around something, I must have COVID. But understand, these simple symptoms are also the primary ones in the beginning, if you're going to have symptoms that you would occur. There are drugs out now. If you remember back in the day, people used to take so many drugs at once. Now we're down to one pill a day, depending upon what regimen your doctor is giving you. Now we're looking at injectables. That pretty soon you can just have an injectable and not take the pills. If these colors represent different types of drugs, when that virus enters your body, it enters your immune system cells, and it tricks your cells to begin to duplicate itself. And these drugs fight off that replication process at different stages. So we don't have the time to really go into it. So what happens is that when that virus enters your body, you need to start meds. If you start the meds, it's going to stop the replication process. If that virus can't reproduce in your body, guess what? Your immune system will be okay, as you won't be going down that continuum as quickly. Not only that, if you're able to be healthy with it, you may not even be able to transmit the virus to someone else. So the important thing is, if a woman or if anyone has been diagnosed as living with HIV and AIDS, they need to enter care quickly, and they need to begin meds and start meds and stay. When you do that, the viral load, what they call the virus goes less in the body, you remain healthy. Right? If you don't, you get drug resistance. A lot of us are hearing about drug resistance because of COVID, which is a virus. Drug resistance just means that the medicines can no longer work. The virus has figured out a way to fight them. So if you're doing your meds right, then the virus will stay low in your body, right? You won't have resistance. Your drugs will work for you. You're going to feel better. HIV now is more like a chronic illness being treated as long as you're taking it. And then we talk about decreased risk of HIV transmission. There's something now, I don't know if you've heard it, U equals U. That means undetectable equals untransmittable. If a woman or anyone who's HIV positive taking their meds correctly, the virus actually goes down so low until they cannot pass it on to someone else. That's important. They cannot pass it, so transmission goes down. So when we look in our communities, in urban communities, is that message getting out? Is that message getting to our women that you need to have an HIV test, that you need to, if you're positive, to enter care? The sooner you enter care, the sooner the virus will go down, and the sooner you're able not to transmit the virus, okay? So we're going to skip this just for time. In terms of HIV testing, there's all sorts. We want to talk about what the church can do. Before COVID, I know every summer, at least at my church and several churches in the area, when you have your community fairs or special days at church, you can call up and have testing done right at your church. You can call up and have testing. And there's tests you can do where people can get the results in 20 minutes, or there are other tests where they will have to come back for the results. But one of the things when we want to start looking at the care of our women, are we having programs where they can not only learn about the virus, but at the same time they're learning about them? Have we brought somebody in for them to be tested? And if we brought somebody in for them to be tested, have we equipped our pastors? Have our pastors gone for training, or part of the health team, a part of the team that have been chosen, who can operate confidentially in terms of sharing and helping and serving those in need? That's important for us to do. There's also the availability now of kits. You can actually buy a kit and do HIV testing within your home, which is really important when people feel stigmatized. So if you are tested, understand when you get the test, it usually takes up to 3 months before you can definitely say definitively that you've gone from the point of when you are infected, the window period is until the time that your test can show it. There are tests that can show it before 3 months, but quite often, if any of you have been tested, they'll ask you questions and they may say, you kind of came back soon. We want to do another test, and they'll have you come back because they want your immune system to be working to see if the virus is indeed there. So that's really important. So the message we want to tell people is, and particularly our women, that you need to be tested. You need, if positive, that you need to begin taking your meds, staying on your meds, that today HIV is a changed thing. It's more like a chronic disease if you're doing what you should be doing. So what should we be doing to stay safe, ladies? One of the things is abstinence or celibacy, right? So, and when we're describing that as having absolutely no sex, right? Where there's going to be an exchange of body fluids. Again, if neither party has the virus, you don't have to worry about that. But do you always know about your partners? Okay. Is somebody tipping? Is somebody doing something else? So these are things we need to look at. You need to be in a mutually monogamous relationship. Now, what does mutually monogamous means? Does it mean that I've been with this person for years? Or does it mean that I just happen to be with this person for 2 months? I'm not seeing any, this is new for me. I usually see a couple of people, but right now I'm just seeing him. So I'm in mutually monogamous. But how do you define that? How do you define being solely just for the two of you? So one thing for sexual activity is abstinence or celibacy, or being in a mutually monogamous relationship. Another is condoms, using them consistently and correctly. Another is that there's now new meds out, and there's another slide on that called PrEP, that if you are at high risk and you take this medication PrEP, your chances of acquiring HIV, of getting that virus to enter your body, is very low, very low. Very low. So do we know about medications we can take to reduce the likelihood that we can acquire the virus? Is that message getting out to our populations? Notice the commercials now. There's commercials out around PrEP, but they tend to be commercials around MSMs, and particularly around now young Black MSMs. The message needs to go to them because they have high rates, but the message needs to come to us as women too. The other thing is strive to engage in sexual behavior where there's not going to be an exchange of body fluids. Remember, we talked about vaginal secretions, anal secretions, those sorts of things, blood, where there will not be that exchange. When you're dealing with sex, you have to speak openly. You have to be comfortable in sharing and asking. Reduce the number of sexual partners. There are some people, for whatever reason, some is, they say, for survival, but whatever the reason, have multiple partners as part of their income. So multiple partners increases the likelihood of a woman acquiring the virus. Okay, so that's important for us to understand. Even positives need to know their status so that they can take care of themselves. Again, if they link to care, If their viral load go down, we're talking about sexual transmission. They cannot pass it on. That doesn't mean if they're shooting drugs and stuff, the medication works for that. We look at women who are in childbearing age. We now tell women they should be visiting her doctor well before they decide to get pregnant, to make sure they're healthy, to make sure they don't have HIV. And if they have HIV, women today can have to give birth to a child that will not have the virus. But it is best if this is found out early so they can get in care, get the treatment with their doctors, so the virus will not pass down. Maybe instead of where the virus is in their body, how much we call that viral load, they may need a C-section as opposed to a vaginal birth. Maybe they need some breastfeeding education. Some people are now saying women can breastfeed. Some are now saying if they take their meds and reach a undetectable viral load. Some are saying women cannot. So this really is a conversation between the woman and her doctor, between her the woman and her OBGYN, as well as the baby's pediatrician. They need to know the woman's health status, how long of her viral load has been detectable, and all sorts of things to make sure that it cannot be passed on to the baby. These are drugs that you can take. One is, those of you who work in the medical field, how's my time? I'm not seeing anything yet. Those who work in the medical field know that if you are exposed, you can go take a pill within 72 hours of the incident. Let's say you got stuck with a needle, blood got splashed in your eyes or something. Well, that's for people who are working. But now we know that people who are not in the medical field, that PEP will work for them. So if you know you've been exposed and it's within 72 hours, you can actually ask to take PEP. And what PEP does, that's called post-exposure prophylactic. And what this drug will do, that if the virus is in your body, it's actually a HIV medication. It will help the virus not reproduce in you, and the likelihood of getting HIV really goes down. So that's important for us to know. But the key is you have to take this medication within 72 hours of the time the virus enters your body. All right. We also know that now there are drugs that if you are not positive, if you don't have the virus, but you want to make sure that you don't get the virus, there's a medication called PrEP. There's one that's for women and men can take. That's called Truvada. The Descovy, the research has only been for men, so that is only for men. But just in December, a shot has come out, and the shot is going to be, you take the shot every 2 months to prevent HIV through sexual transmission. Do we have this information out in our communities? Do we have the information to know that there are things we can do so that we won't acquire the virus? The last big thing that I want to touch on is intimate partner violence. This is a biggie for women as it relates to HIV infection. And it stands to reason when you don't have control of yourself, when there is someone else over you, you may elect, sometimes, I'm going to say you elect only because it is safer, than being killed or getting your brains beat out. You don't know what's going on in that relationship, that sometimes women are engaged in activities because that choice is safer at the moment than the consequence. So when we talk about stigma, we need to understand and get rid of this stigma around violence. Some people call it domestic violence with women. There are all sorts of reasons behind women are in those situations and why they stay in those situations. And we need not point fingers, but reach out. Just as I started with how the one woman said, right, she hid under a rock. She smoked a rock. Now she's leaning on her rock. We need to reach out these sisters to learn to lean on their rock as they are going through and striving for themselves to move out of those situations versus having those conversations. Child, if I was her, I would just leave. You don't know the circumstances. And so we need to lose that stigma. One note here, I am going to say a little bit more intimate partner violence. It can be traumatizing for some. It can trigger. And so I want you to know I'm giving information. It's really not for people to share their stories when it's question and answer, because you really need someone equipped to handle that. You can actually do harms by opening up wounds, getting people to share. And you say, didn't we have a good time talking about that? But they're left home to go home with whatever's going on. So always remember, in your churches, when you're speaking with women, having groups, you do it. It's an injustice if you don't include intimate partner violence or domestic violence, whichever term you prefer. You have to include this, because a large percentage of our women who are HIV positive, the bottom line is they have been abused and they are being abused, okay? See, so what's the difference? The difference is that in terms of terminology, when we say domestic violence, we tend to talk about household. That includes, it could be roommates or family members, not just that significant other. So domestic implies household. Intimate partner violence implies even without the home, and it implies physical, sexual, or psychological harm by a current or former partner or spouse. So when we think initially, when they talked about domestic violence, it always was talking about things in the home. Then they came out with this term because they needed to expand it for women. That no, you may not be living with your abuser, but is that a former or current partner? Is that an ex or something? Then you are also being abused. So they came up with the term IPV, or intimate partner violence. Look at this. 55% of women living with HIV have experienced domestic violence. A large percentage, okay? So it's a big issue. I want to show this video real quick. I'm sorry I'm talking fast, but I just so much I want to share.
I often tell people how much money you have in your bank account. HIV is a disease of opportunity, and the dynamics switch even more when there's intimate partner violence involved in that.
I didn't even identify with being in a violent relationship because I thought that was right. I never looked at unhealthy relationship and saw myself.
Many times they use HIV against me. You should be glad that you have someone to love you, because who's going to want you with HIV?
Well, with these men who are abusive, they don't want to use condoms, or they don't want us to go to the doctor.
Living with HIV is nothing to be ashamed of, and it's changing the voices in your head. Because when you're repeatedly told that you're stupid, that you're no good, you begin to repeat that in your head.
Why are my T cells always so low? And that's because of the stress and the depression.
I knew if I gave him a chance to say, I'm sorry, if I gave him the chance to say, I didn't mean to do it, then I'll probably still be there today.
I waited till he went to work. I acted like nothing was going on. I got out and I ain't looked back. I left. When I left, I left.
It's about me being healthy. It's about me being well and me getting what I need out of all of this.
With new treatments, there is hope.
And we can live a normal lifespan, and it doesn't change any of our worth at all.
I found that there is life outside of this diagnosis. It was just waiting for me to find it.
So that's a message we want to be giving, that even women and there are men who experience intimate partner violence as well. And we need to understand that you really can't separate, particularly with, it's all women, but particularly when we're talking to our sisters, you cannot leave out this piece around intimate partner violence, okay? They are physically or sexually, also emotionally abused, and that wears and tears. They're forced to engage in activities that they may prefer not to, but feeling that they have no power over, that they do engage in those things. So the risk factors are not just the body fluids. The risk factors are women's position in society. The risk factors is around socioeconomics. Sometimes I just stay with this abuser because I got these kids. Where we gonna go? I can't take my kids and put them in the street. Where are we going to go? Lack of knowledge, not understanding that there is medications you can take. The importance of actually getting into care if you are. The importance of there are things that you can do to reduce your risk, right? Then there's the biological vulnerability, the way we are built. If you think about how women are built, think of the vaginal area. The vaginal area is moist tissue. The virus, it's easier absorbed, particularly when there's little wears and tears, versus a penis, which has solid skin and just the minimal opening, right? So a woman, even the way she is built, is at increased risk of acquiring the virus and other sexually transmitted diseases. The fact that more women are starting to use abuse substances, right? The facts that there are not a lot of cultural interventions for us. I had the pleasure of really going around the country, and one time even up in Canada with one of the CDC's interventions for women, right? And guess what? When the money changed, when the power who had the control changed, they pulled every single intervention for women, because there was no one there to fight for them. It like made you cry. It was so sad. But they increased the interventions for men who have sex with men. This is a reality. This is not a judgment, but it talks about who has the power to decide, right? That's very important. So then there are cultural influences as it relates to intimate partner violence. Have you grown in a home where you saw the women who were important in your life being abused? You can grow up believing that if he don't beat me, he don't love me. That may sound silly to you because the way you were brought up, but culture, the environment in what we are brought up in, the gender roles that we have, there's a lot, the religious beliefs that we have. I remember when we lived in Jersey and we were doing a thing on intimate partner violence, and there was this older white couple that came in and they said, can we please listen? And we said, yes. And they came in because they said, we saw that you all were talking about domestic violence and that our daughter is being abused. Her husband beats her all the time, but our pastor tells her that the husband is the head and she must stay. And they wanted to hear another thought on women being abused, right? Are we giving messages to our women that will help them be strong? And I want to ask you, thinking about what comes to mind when you think of intimate partner violence. I've been talking about it, but real quick, because we don't have any time. What comes to mind? What comes to mind when you think of intimate partner violence? When you think of domestic violence, what is that? What are the acts? Somebody, how do we do this on this? Can they just call it out, Aretha? Huh?
It's like power, but yeah, I'm monitoring the chat, and if you have any comments that you want to interject, please just put your comments in the chat box, and I'll make sure that Deborah responds, and we'll try to respond to all of them, but please get your comments ready.
Mm-hmm. So I want to just talk about most times when we think about domestic violence or intimate partner violence, we think of the punches, we think of the black eyes, we think of those things, and what we say is that's the physical, that's the outside, that's what we see. Mm-hmm. But when you really look at intimate partner violence or domestic violence, this is what it is. It's using coercion of threats. It's using intimidation. It's using emotional abuse. It's using isolation. You ever had some friends that they can't never be with anybody unless they're man with them? Yeah. They can't do anything on their own. He checks their phone. He meets them at work. He brings them home from work. They use the children against them. Yeah. Right. Talk about I'm large and in charge because I'm the man. All of these things, use of economic abuse. I don't get my way. You don't want what I want, baby. You don't have no food for these kids. Yeah. You know, you don't have anything. So when we think about, we need to broaden. We need to extend the lens. We need to think about when we're talking about intimate partner violence or domestic violence, whichever we'd like to call it, that it is more than the punch. It is more than the physical. And that it's all these other things that are going on. You know, is your church a welcoming place?
Mm-hmm.
You can't tell your story to everybody, and you shouldn't. But is there a group? Has there been identified where women can go to? You're not equipped. I'm telling you, you need trained people really to equip, but someone that can be confidential and point them where they should go. Even in terms of pastors, do you have a listing of the places? Do you know the safe houses of where your women can go? Right? Oh,
Right.
you know, do you have this information? Do they know they can come and get that information from you? And so when we talk about this power wheel, it's called the theory of gender and power. And the theory of gender and power is this whole cultural notion that the man is in charge. And lots of times we use the Bible to say that. To root it up, that the woman must follow the man. As my mama used to say, you have to follow what God's word says. But who said it? When they said it? What was the context? Don't allow people to twist God's word just because it's in the Bible. There's more to that, what God has in that word. His word is true, but don't let people twist it. And so lots of times people do all types of things around it, but it's this whole thing about the male having the power. So as an outgrowth of that, they now all have all sorts of domestic wheels. And the one that we want to really look at for our women is the one that's HIV. Look at this, the manipulation of the children, the isolation, economic abuse. These are the key factors of women and why they stay in relationships, you know, why they cannot take care of themselves. How are we dealing with this? What services? I got to stop, right?
And, you know, Ms. Dennison, I mean, yeah, we have to wrap up, but I was looking at your power wheel, and you know, I remember there was another workshop that we were doing, and also pets are used because people are, you know, they're attached to their pets, and then, you know, they start threatening the pet, you know, and then you don't have anywhere to take the pet, and you're out on the street as well, and that's another reason why folks stay in some of these relationships. So you're right, it's more than just, you know, the emotional part. It is a lot more than that. Do you want to wrap up on this?
Yes, I'm going to wrap up on this. Okay. So what I want us to understand that intimate partner violence, domestic violence affects us all. I don't know if you remember some years ago when Juanita Bynum, she had this wonderful wedding. She had found the perfect man that the Lord had brought her. And then unfortunately, there was this incident in the what do you call it, parking lot, where he was found abusing her. And Essence had the heading on the magazine was "New Face of the Battered Woman." That Juanita Bynum is not the new face. There's been women in her status, rich women, poor, who've always been battered. Again, we categorize things. This middle one is this woman told her partner that she had HIV. He killed her.
Wow.
And his rationale, he didn't try to deny it. He said, yeah, I killed her because she gave it to me and now she killed me. And this one, the last one on my end on is Sacramento. I don't know if you all saw that last week where this man killed his 3 children, himself, and the person who was there to watch through social services on the home visit. And he had always told his wife that he was going to kill her. And so she had gotten this protection. And the truth is, one of the reasons why women stay, we can't get it all into it, that protection doesn't help with so much. She had protection.
Yeah.
In a church.
You know what, Ms. Dennison, we're going to have to do
we stop it.
We really need to keep the conversation going. But we need to bring you back for a part 2, because this is a lot of information. And we can tell you're just getting started. You are just getting started. And I wanted to ask just a question. There is still so much stigma associated with HIV. And you know, it just looks like, you know, the stigma has not gone away, even all these years that we've been talking about it. So can you highlight the impact that faith has in plays in addressing HIV?
Yeah, well, first off, I want to say in the beginning, the faith community, not all, I don't really want to generalize, but a large percentage of the faith community was part of the problem with carrying stigma on. Because if you look at the primary behaviors of how you acquire the virus, drug use, sexual promiscuity, somebody going outside of their relationship, all sorts of things, when we say that's outside the will of God. Right. And so those people were bad. I know we used to run a faith program here in Pittsburgh, and I know of people who were kicked out of their church because they were positive. I know of pastors who said, we've worked with people in our churches, but we can't mention AIDS in our church because the people will go ballistic. These are my words, but that's basically what they were saying. So part of it is, but the church is waking up. And one of the things that we found, we need to educate our pastors. And I'm not saying that a lot of them aren't, but in general, there needs to be education. There needs to be sessions. Some of my favorite sessions were sessions with pastors alone, where they could ask their own questions without worrying about, not everybody, the congregation and everybody. Their questions were different. Their sharing was different. So they need to come together and look at what there is. And I'm sure they're doing it anyway, find out what are the resources in the community. But part of it is our misunderstanding. And like I said in the beginning, we tended to point the finger at people. We labeled people versus looking at behavior. And so it has caused a big problem of moving forward in removing stigma.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. That's powerful, powerful information, powerful presentation. And thank you so much for your passion. Thank you so much for keeping this topic in the forefront of our minds. You do so much, and you've been around for so long working in this field. And we thank you for sharing all that knowledge and all that information with us. And if you have questions that we didn't get to or couldn't get to, continue to put them in the chat, and hopefully we could find a way to answer those questions. But Ms. Dennison, we just thank you for your expertise in this area. Do you have any final thoughts that you like to share with us tonight?
Well, my final thought is that I truly appreciate my church, because I think our church understands the importance of starting to address, continuing to go back to addressing stigma, and to start bringing AIDS back to the forefront. My thought is, because you don't hear what you used to hear about AIDS, because you don't hear of the deaths and the wasting away of bodies, does not mean that AIDS is not going away. It's a serious problem within our community, and particularly with our women.
Well, I just say stay tuned for part 2, because we will have to bring you back to give us more information about the topic. But thank you so much, Mrs. Dennison, for using your voice and your platform to raise awareness on HIV and AIDS. And so now we're going to turn it over to Dr. Detavia Parrish to close us out.
Wow. Just a phenomenal program. Let your requests be made known to God, and He will send you people with passion and purpose, like Sister Deborah Dennison. Sister Dennison, thank you so much for these intimate stories that encourages us to take self-inventory and hold ourselves accountable for our often private actions and activities. And despite the significant advancements in medical research and expanded access to life-saving drugs, the alarming statistic is that Black Americans account for 13% of the U.S. population, but 42% of the new HIV diagnoses, and of those diagnoses, over 40% are Black women. With the decades of silence, of stigma, and structural barriers to treatment and testing, we must understand there are no high-risk groups, HIV and AIDS has claimed the lives of far too many, and we as the church can act. What can we do? We can offer access to resources, testing, and spiritual counseling. Let's get tested. Let's practice abstinence. Let's talk about intimate partner violence. And for our people who are living with and are affected by HIV and AIDS, we must demand that the humanity of the population be non-negotiable. We must see their lives as being equally as sacred and valuable as any other life. Anything less than this goes against the values of love, hospitality, and service. Again, thank you, Sister Deborah Dennison. Thank you to the Women Homes and Overseas Missionary Society. And thank you to Darren Kent and the Star of Zion Communications Department for bringing a voice to this important program. Indeed, there is a part 2. Not yet. So join us next time for When Freedom Speaks. Have a good evening.